Hey folks, welcome back. Today we'll be talking about making a maple countertop for an island. And I actually started yesterday. I forgot to turn the camera on. So I'm gonna go back a bit and explain what I did so far. So here we go. So basically if you make or the way I make it anyways, butcher block, what I call butcher block. I just brought it'll be looking, this is a cutting board, but what I'm talking about is like edge grain maple laminated together to create a countertop. I make quite a few of these, usually out of maple, but for this island over here, that's sitting over there, I will be making a walnut version of this. So I usually start out with 8/4, so that's 2-inch white maple. Basically the boards, this is the cutoff of the pieces here. And to start off, you say if you want a 8-foot countertop like this is going to be 8 feet by 38. You want to start out with lumber that's slightly longer. So you need at least, you probably need like 9-foot lumber. Or if you can't find that, you're stuck with 10. The reason why is, especially maple on the end, I don't know if you can see this, quite a few boards are like this. This is pretty typical to have a big crack on the end that goes in about 3 inches, 2 or 3 inches. Sometimes not, but this is pretty common. So if you start with 8-foot lumber, you'd have to deal with this. So I usually start with longer, like 9, at least a foot longer anyways. Yeah, so the first few steps, so this is sort of your boards you get. So you cut that to length, leaving about 2 inches longer, 2 or 3 inches extra. Then you would bring the one side to the joiner. You would join, actually you join two sides. You join the flat face and the one edge you need square. And the third step would be to plane the top face until the board is flat and parallel. Now, after that, I run the board through this sander here with an 80 grit sandpaper. That makes it, I don't really like the face of after it's planed, it's kind of glazed. So I find that with running it with a 60 grit through there, it evens out the board a little more, and it creates almost like micro grooves that will help with the glue up. By the way, if you tackling a project like this, you will need some pretty good tools, because it's very hard wood. So especially the saw, you need probably like at least 3 horsepower or 5 horsepower saw, because it's pretty hard to cut. And for this purpose, you would need a ripping blade. So that's typically a blade that has less teeth in it. So it makes a bit of a coarser cut, but it's much easier to cut when you rip big boards like this. And it is pretty hard on the tools. So yeah, you need a pretty decent saw for sure. So the next step, once it's plain sanded, the two faces, I would take that to the saw and cut. You can see all the strips here. They're not glued right now, they're just sitting there. Here, you lose about 1/8 of an inch. So if you want, this one I'm shooting to be about 1.5 inches thick, maybe a bit thicker. So I cut these just over 1 5/8 inches. And yeah, so the next step will be I'm gonna glue up about that many, probably 12 inches together, and glue several blanks like this. I usually do it 12 inches or under, so that's in case I need to run them on my jointer, they will still fit there. But and also it takes quite a while to glue, so if you glue a very wide piece, sometimes the first board starts to set already, so I like to do it in shorter pieces. That way I have a better chance to get them all nice and flat. So here I have about 20 inches, so I'm gonna do about two 10-inch blanks. I usually mark it like this, so that means I'm not gonna put glue right there. Line up the end on one end, so I usually make a triangle here so I can line it up. Well, for this we'll be using, it's a good idea to use a water resistant type glue, so I usually use this Tybond 2. Okay, so the goal here is to have an even spread of glue, not too much glue, so you want some squeeze out but not a ton of glue, obviously. I also covered the floor with cardboard, as you can see there, because you will get a lot of glue dripping out in the bottom there, so good idea, cover that. I usually use like a scraper, or you can use an offcut of maple, works pretty good. Just spread that. Try to cover most of it. I usually like to glue both surfaces, that way less chances of missing somewhere. Okay, so what I've done here, I'll just glued the first blank. You have to go pretty quickly here. That's why I do this way. And I just temporarily put some of these bar clamps, parallel clamps on the end. And there, just to sort of set it up more or less correctly until I glue up this part, and then we'll put it all together. I won't put any glue here, but I'll put it all together, and I'll use pipe clamps because there's a lot more torque. You don't really want to use these bar clamps, these parallel clamps. Okay, so here we go. This is about 3 or 4 hours later. Took the clamps off. It's ready for some scraping. I have the other piece over there. The key is to scrape that glue before it gets completely hard. So you want it to wait at least probably 2 hours, depending on the temperature, but yeah, you want to scrape this before it's fully, like, you don't want to scrape this the day after. It's pretty difficult. Just like that. We're gonna pass, I'm gonna do a couple passes on the planer, just take a very light cut on either side of the boards. I have this has a helical head, so it doesn't chip as much as a regular planer, so you might want to be careful with a regular planer there. Take very small cuts to avoid some of the chipping that happens with maple. And next here we need the two edges to be perfectly square. So I have to run that on the jointer again. I just want to check the square. You can see I'm slightly off. So I'm going to run that through a jointer on both sides. It's 25 inches wide, so I have to make sure I don't. This is only 20, so it'll be fine. At this point, you want that joint to be just about perfect. This one is fine the way it is here. I would sometimes put a couple biscuits to line them up. As opposed to this joint is not. This is not good enough here on this side here. As you can see, the gap is just too much gap. It won't. This doesn't bend much anymore at all, so it needs to be pretty much perfectly square. So I might have to either turn this around or run it on the joiner again. Okay, I'll glue that up. Okay, so that's where we're at. End of the day, we got here you need a few less clamps when it's that wide here. So there's about 5-6 clamps on this one. And at this point, it should be, check it with a straight edge and it should be pretty flat. It's pretty good. So I got one here, and I got one here. So we still have some ridges here that we'll pass it through that sander tomorrow and glue it all together and it should be good. Okay, so here you go, it's pretty much there. This is, I started with 80 grit and I'm gonna pass it a couple more times at 100 grit and then we're ready to assemble. I guess if you don't have one of these machines, you would have to plane it pretty perfect before assembling and then sand it with a belt sander, or the best thing would be probably to take it to a shop that has a sander like this. Okay, final stage. I did cut the pieces to length and join them together, just glue. And again, you want to even out the amount of clamps on the bottom and the top. At this point, you want to have it perfectly flat. Use a flat board or straight edge, and you can actually play with, if you have a bit of a gap here, I mean, if it's crowned like this, like up, you can actually put a little more pressure on the bottom and release a bit on the top, and then actually go back. Okay, the final step here, I cut the sink, and also for when you use a maple top, the best I think is to use a dropping sink like this. Undermounts, I don't know, doesn't really work too good because you need to finish the edge with, I have done it and I finished the edge with an epoxy, and it's okay if you have a bar sink, say, but for a kitchen sink, I'm not a big fan of having a sink in the island like that, but that's what the client wants, so that's what he gets. So a combination of sanders I use for this. I use this little sander here to do the edges with like probably 100 grit belts. I think it just speeds things up, and this one is nice and light, so you can use it vertically. Oops, what is it? So you'd be able to, I usually do it on a 45 on the end, and then this way. And then I use my random orbit, always with a vacuum pickup. This vacuum does an amazing job here. It's hardly any dust at all. Yeah, so now it's just sanding. So I sanded the seam already, it's all good. So I usually go 100, great. Then I go down to 120 and probably 150. Then I'll machine the edge. And sometimes I go 180, but usually 150 is good enough. And we'll be putting first coat of oil in no time here. Stay tuned.